From Psalm chapter 78, God's kindness to rebellious Israel. A contemplation of Asaph. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings, old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generations to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wondrous works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, and children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God, and not forge the works of God, but keep his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its hearts upright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back to the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God. They refused to walk in his laws, and forgot his works and wonders that he had shown them. Marvelous things he did in the sights of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zon. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through. He made the waters stand up like a heap. In the daytime he also led them with a cloud. In the night with the light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness. He gave them drink in abundance like the depths. He brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. But they sinned even more against him. By rebelling against the Most High in wilderness, they tested God in their hearts by asking for food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke against God. They said, Can God prepare the table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rock so that waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Can he give them bread also? Can he provide meat for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was furious. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger was also came up against Israel, because they did not believe in God, and did not trust in his salvation. And he had commanded the clouds above, and opened the doors of heaven, and rained down manna on them to eat, and made them bread of heaven. Men ate angels' food, and sent them food to full. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and his power he brought in the south wind. He also rained meat on them like dust, feathered fowl like the sands of the sea, and he let them fall in the midst of their camp, all around their dwelling. So they ate and were filled, and he gave them their own desire. They were not deprived of their cravings. And while the food was still in their mouths, the wrath of God came against them, and slew the stoutest of them, and struck down the choice men of Israel. In spite of this day, they still sinned. They did not believe in his wondrous works. Therefore, their days and he consumed in futility, and their years in fear. And he slew them, then he sought them. And they returned to sought earnestly for God. And they remembered that God was their rock, and the Most High God their Redeemer. Nevertheless, they flattered him with their mouth, and they lied to him with their tongue. For their heart was not steadfast with him, nor were they faithful to his covenant. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity, and they destroyed them. Yes, many a time he turned against his anger away, and did not stir up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were but flesh, and breath that passes away and does not come again. He often, and how often they provoked him in the wilderness, and grieved him in the desert. Yes, again and again they tempted God, and limited the holiness of one of Israel. They did not remember his power. The day when he redeemed them from the enemy, when his works and his signs were in Egypt, and his wonders in the field of Zon, turned their rivers into blood, and their streams that they could not drink, sent swarms of flies against them, which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. He also gave their crops the caterpillar, and their labor to the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost, and he gave up their cattle to the hail, and their flocks to the fiery lightning. He cast them into the fierceness of his anger, wrath, indignation, and trouble, by sending angels of destruction among them. He made a path for his anger. He did not spare their souls from death, but he gave their lives over to the plague, and destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt, the first of their strength in the tents of Ham. But he made his own people go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they did not fear. But the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to his holy border, their mountain which his right hand had acquired. He also drove out the nations before them, allotted them an inheritance by survey, and made the tribes of Israel dwell in their tents. Yet they tested and provoked the Most High, and did not keep his testimonies, but turned back and acted unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their carved images. When God heard this, he was furious and greatly abhorred Israel, so that they forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had placed among them, and delivered the strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hands. He also gave the people over to the sword, and was furious with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given in marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no limitations. Then the Lord awoke, as from sleep, like a mighty man who shouts because of wine, and he beat back his enemies and put them on a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he rejected the tent of Joseph, and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth which he has established forever. He also chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from the following, the ewes and the young he brought him, the shepherd Jacob, his people, and Israel, his inheritance. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. That was Psalms chapter 78.